What's the ideal way to travel from the largest city in Alabama to Knoxville, Memphis, or even Chattanooga? If you're like many people, the only option is either by car or by booking a flight out of one of the most expensive airports in the country. Today, we're going to take a look at passenger rail options along the Tennessee River Valley and beyond.
Editing Urbanist here, and I wish I had more video and pictures from riding trains in this region, but I don't. So you'll just be seeing videos from random train trips or places around the country throughout the video. Sorry, and one day maybe we'll be able to get some footage from the area. And if you do have footage from there and you want it featured in a future video or for any other video, just feel free to reach out and let me know.
Hello and welcome to Inland Urbanist. You might be forgiven if you're wondering why this channel, which is centered on the inland region here of Southern California, is talking about Alabama and Tennessee, as neither state has much connection to our region. However, although I am from here, I do have relatives in that area, and in particular my parents. Thus, I have been considering routes that would go through the area for a long time, as it would be nice to be able to visit them by train. These ideas include both the corridor proposal as it's being presented here, as well as long distance proposals, which I submitted to the FRA's long distance intercity rail study a couple years back. Though not all were included in their final maps, the current plans could at some point in the future deliver rail service to the area, namely the Detroit to New Orleans train, which based on the conceptual service plan would have a stop in Decatur, Alabama. But why take a train all the way across the country? It's certainly possible to get there much faster by plane, as I've done myself many times. Now, not to dox myself or my parents too much, but my dad was a big train aficionado from the time he was young, and is by far the primary reason that I myself am interested in trains, as he would spend hours chasing them around Southern California with me in tow. Thus, I had hoped to one day be able to visit by train and ride around somewhere with him again. Unfortunately, that will no longer be possible, as he passed away in April of this year. Although I had been contemplating making this video for a while, that has slightly altered its direction to now also be a bit of a memorial, not merely showing off the route. Also, if you're watching this video on Patreon on its release day, today would have been his birthday. I am grateful that I was able to share the concept with him in the past prior to his passing, and he liked the idea. I just wish he could have lived to actually see it come to pass. On that note, now it is time to look at the route itself. If Memphis to Knoxville passenger rail service sounds suspiciously familiar, that's because the state of Tennessee is already studying it in various forms. However, their study is focused on passing through Nashville, or more accurately, it's maybe better to say they're studying 3 corridors. That would be Memphis to Nashville, Nashville to Atlanta, and Chattanooga to Knoxville or Bristol. And crucially, all 3 corridors are primarily within Tennessee. There's also a proposed long distance train that would go from New York City to Houston via Knoxville and Chattanooga, but as planned would then turn to go down through Atlanta and Mobile. In contrast, the idea being presented here would add Alabama and Mississippi on a route that dips through the fastest growing part of the Yellowhammer state. Additionally, there is a potential for extensions. On the western end, it could stretch beyond Memphis to serve Little Rock, and on the eastern end, it could go past Knoxville to Bristol. Both have been the subject of study by Arkansas and Tennessee, respectively. It's also worth noting that Bristol is a twin city with a counterpart in Virginia that they too have studied extending rail service to. But before we get too carried away, let's look at the route itself. The meat of the route would be from Memphis to Knoxville in a corridor that actually is similar in length to the Lausanne corridor here in SoCal, where the Pacific Surfliner runs. The bulk of this route is currently the Norfolk Southern Memphis district. However, with the recent proposal by Union Pacific to buy out Norfolk Southern, the name on the owner slip might be changing soon. While it seems like we won't be getting a revival of the Southern Pacific name out of the deal, it could be a point of leverage for the states to get service up and running as part of conditions of approval for that project. With all that being said, let's take a look at the cities this route could pass through. Starting on the far western end, on departure from the Arkansas state capital, we could be going big on a bit of regional service and have a few stations on the way out. To that end, the proposal I have would be for there to be stops in Jacksonville and Cabot before a bit of a cruise to Kensett, then a slight interruption in what should be a swift journey across the Arkansas Delta to stop at Wynne before arriving in the home of the Blues and the largest city on the route, Memphis. Continuing east, Collierville could round out a second stop in the Memphis region before once again setting out into the wild. I have penciled in stops at Grand Junction and Middleton for the sake of connectivity, but the combined population of those 2 cities is less than some high school graduating classes. In either case, whether stops at Grand Junction and Middleton are made or not, the next stop should be in Corinth, Mississippi, followed by Iuka. Crossing the state line into Alabama, there would be a stop at Muscle Shoals to serve the other Quad Cities area, then Decatur. Then after crossing the Tennessee River, it would continue on to Huntsville with a stop at Madison on the way in. After leaving Huntsville, I have once again penciled in stops at smaller towns of Gurley and or Woodville, but just like Grand Junction and Middleton, their populations are quite low, and it could be preferable to just have the train rocket out of town and run directly to Scottsboro with no intermediate stops. The final stop in Alabama would be in Bridgeport, and crossing both the Tennessee River again and the state line into Tennessee brings us into Chattanooga. From there, the route would head northeast, stopping by the City with Spirit, the Friendly City, and the Lakeway to the Smokies before settling into Marble City. From there, the final leg would pass through Morristown, Greenville, and Johnson City before easing into the final stop on the route of Bristol, right over the border in Virginia. With the route out of the way, let's take a look at what it would be connecting. As noted, Memphis is the largest city on the route, with over 600,000 people living in a metro of more than 1.3 million. Little Rock is another 200,000 and is the Arkansas state capital. Huntsville is another 215,000, but that was at the 2020 census. With the city growing at 15% a year since then, the population estimate has already passed 250,000 and continues to climb. Chattanooga adds more than 180,000, 190,000 in Knoxville, and 45,000 in Bristol to round out the major cities on the route. While these populations might not sound impressive all on their own in comparison to other parts of the country, the metro areas do account for around 4.6 million people, which is more than 85% of the total population of 5.4 million people of all metro areas along the route. Among these people are a large population of students attending dozens of universities in or very near to the corridor. Despite having a population less than a third that of Memphis, Knoxville makes a strong claim to be the city with the largest student population at around 40,000, which works out to a little over 25% of their whole population. Other notable institutions include the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock, Harding University in Searcy, which is readily accessible from Kensett, the University of Memphis, Rhodes College, Baptist College of Health Sciences, Southern College of Optometry, and University of Tennessee Health Sciences Center in Memphis. The University of North Alabama, which is the oldest certified university in the state, is in Florence in the Muscle Shoals area. UAH, Alabama A&M, and Oakwood University in Huntsville, UTC in Chattanooga, Lee University and Pentecostal Theological Seminary in Cleveland, UTK, Johnson University, and Knoxville College, which is celebrating 150 years as I make this video, so congratulations to them, are all in Knoxville. Carson Newman University in Jefferson City, and East Tennessee State University and a branch of Tusculum University, which is the oldest university in Tennessee, are in Johnson City. That is just a small sample of the institutions, as there are a number of other community colleges, technical schools, and other colleges and universities, and more of the proposed stops. There are several other major attractions along the route as well. As noted previously, Little Rock is the capital and largest city of Arkansas. Memphis is the largest city on the Mississippi River and the second largest in Tennessee. And additionally, Knoxville and Chattanooga round out numbers 3 and 4, respectively. Huntsville is the biggest city in Alabama, although the Birmingham metro area is larger. And together with other stops being proposed, these communities are not just home to considerable amounts of people, but they also have a large number of medical facilities, making this train a vital link for surrounding communities to reach those destinations for people who are receiving care. And of course, there are plenty of other large employers, from federal government facilities to Fortune 500 companies and their headquarters. There are also numerous tourist attractions in all the cities where people can visit and learn history about the region. Now that some of the main attractions are established, it is time to take a closer look at the service proposal itself. As mentioned before, the way I had first started looking at the idea had focused mostly on Knoxville to Memphis, and I still think that should probably be a core with the most service. How much service? As noted earlier, this portion of the route is about 360 miles long, which is only slightly longer than the 351-mile length of the Surfliner service, which runs on the Losan corridor here in Southern California. Surfliner currently has a dozen daily departures, with plans for 13 to be starting within the next few months and up to 18 round trips within a few years. However, that is for the LA to San Diego portion. North of Union Station, there are only 5 daily round trips, and 3 of those end at Goleta. The full-length journey from San Luis Obispo to San Diego only has 2 daily round trips. There's also a 3rd daily trip available from LA to San Luis Obispo via the Coast Starlight, but not to all the same stations that Surfliner makes. At present, only 2 of the cities along the proposed route have any sort of intercity passenger rail service, and that would be Little Rock and Memphis. Both also have streetcar systems. Coincidence? Amtrak's Texas Eagle stops in Little Rock while the city of New Orleans visits Memphis on their runs between Chicago and Dallas or New Orleans, respectively. Nevertheless, although I have not seen this specific route proposed before, there is interest in increasing rail service in several portions of the corridor. The Arkansas DOT has studied higher speed rail from Little Rock to Memphis. Tennessee has looked at several corridors in the state, including Chattanooga to Bristol, and the proposed New York City to Houston route included in the Amtrak Connect maps and study would run from Bristol to Chattanooga before dipping down to Atlanta. In addition to the 2 Amtrak routes mentioned above, there are a number of other proposed routes that would intersect, not just interline, with the proposal here. In Memphis, that includes Memphis to Nashville service. Decatur would bring in a connection to another long-distance proposal for Detroit to New Orleans. In addition to the Houston to NYC proposal from Bristol to Chattanooga, the Scenic City could provide connection to Chicago to Miami trains and Atlanta to Chattanooga high-speed rail and Atlanta to Chattanooga to Nashville rail service. While everything I've seen on the topic shows that they would not be the same project, it does seem to me that it would make sense if they were. Putting it all together, this would be a valuable connection for communities along the route, not just to each other, but to the broader rail network across the entire country. Now that the route is pretty well defined, it is time to fill in the service itself. Ambition is great, and I like trains, so if it were left to me with an unlimited budget, we could say one train every 5 minutes for the whole line. Obviously, that's far from realistic. That's more service than most light rail or even subway lines around the country deliver. Being more realistic, I do believe that a Surfliner level of service would do wonders, especially for the Memphis to Knoxville core segment. While less than ideal, the ends could trail off a bit, though the drop-off seen on Surfliner could be a bit extreme as well. I think a realistic situation could be a dozen round trips with 4 going for the full Little Rock to Bristol trip and 8 doing Bristol to Memphis. Or if by some miracle it got up to 18 proposed for Surfliner, then those other trips would be adjusted upwards to 6 and 12 respectively. That would provide the opportunity to make a train every couple of hours, as well as some which are able to deliver a little boost of service into the major cities during their peak hours. Dreaming is nice, but how realistic is this plan? Is there appetite for rail service in this corridor? It would seem that the answer to that latter question is a resounding yes. As noted before, there has been ongoing interest in rail in at least 2 portions of the corridor, namely Little Rock to Memphis, and again from Chattanooga to Bristol. Basically, it's just not Alabama and Mississippi that are working on trains in their portion of the corridor. However, both Alabama and Mississippi are part of the Southern Rail Commission, which has been pushing for several rail improvements across the South, most recently leading to the successful launch of the Mardi Gras service between Mobile and New Orleans, though that is the exact opposite end of the 2 states. Additionally, although we have not really talked about Virginia except in passing as providing a potential connection in Bristol to points east, a part of the argument for extending passenger rail to Bristol hinges on the idea that it would continue on into Tennessee, further connecting communities. There is even a to and through Bristol Rail coalition dedicated to that outcome. While Tennessee's interest naturally is centered around connections to Nashville, which is the state capital, additional connections via this corridor under discussion here would only help bolster the case for getting to Bristol on either side. Of course, if this is to come past, there will need to be more than just interest. It should go without saying that it would be best operated by Amtrak, both due to their legal ability to be granted access as well as for ease of integration with other routes that would integrate the corridor that are currently or presumably would be operated by Amtrak. Having the combined reservation ticketing experience with those trains is a no-brainer, especially on the NEC end in Bristol, where people would be able to transfer to travel to DC, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and points in between. Turning now to the infrastructure side of things, there will obviously need to be upgrades. Now, while we won't be making a very detailed list of every single thing that's needed, we will cover some major themes. Helpfully, the Arkansas DOT actually already evaluated some of what is necessary to provide up to 110 mph service from Little Rock to Memphis in their study, which was published in 2019, though that assumed only 2 daily trips, not the higher number being optimally proposed in this thought experiment. Conversation could be had about whether it's worth it to go for 110, as a fair amount of the corridor would likely not be able to support that speed geometrically without significant rework, and even in the Arkansas case, it only saved 20 minutes on the trip from Little Rock to Memphis, and that study assumed fewer stops than has been proposed here. I'm not quite versed enough in the situation to make the call either way, but 110 obviously would be sensational if possible, but it certainly isn't necessary. On the other hand, it's not just the high speed that matters, it's the lowest speeds too. Terminals are often notorious slow points in the network that drag down overall speed and stretch out trips to be longer ordeals for no reason. Ditto for other infrastructure like bridges. The route crosses the Arkansas River, the Mississippi River, and roughly parallels the Tennessee River in Alabama and Tennessee, and much of that is navigable. That means there are several bridges, and while some are high enough for vessel traffic to pass underneath, several are not and instead have a portion which opens, an activity which delays rail traffic when it occurs. It is here that we return to the earlier mention of the UP buyout of Norfolk Southern. Notoriously a nightmare to work with for passenger services, UP has been slightly more conciliatory as of late, as they seek to grease the skids of the merger that would create the first truly transcontinental private railroad in American history. As much of this route would be on UP and Norfolk Southern track, it might be possible to wrangle a commitment to allow some services to come out of the proposed merger, similar to what is in principle supposed to be the result from the Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern merger from a couple years back, which on paper has provided access to Meridian Speedway for passenger service. The Southern Rail Commission is already the venue for that initiative, and having also gotten the Mardi Gras service launched earlier this year, it only seems logical that they would be involved in this effort as well. However, there might still be a bit of a wrinkle for that, as at the moment the Southern Rail Commission is only Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Whether Arkansas and Tennessee should join the commission, or if the commission merely will work alongside those states, and perhaps Virginia, to advance the concept is certainly a conversation which would need to be had, as there are undoubtedly pros and cons for both. Anyway, that about wraps up this latest and special installment of the Rail Visioning series. If you appreciated this video, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button so that you can see the next videos as they are ready. And stop by Patreon if you want to send monetary support. I know this is probably going to start looking like yet another train channel at this point, but do not despair, there are several other topics waiting in the wings to pique other interests. Until next time, have a good day and safe riding.